I'm the man. I speak great Spanish.
How did this 14-year-old high school kid from the US learn to speak fluent Spanish while he was still at school? Well, in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how he did it so that you can steal his secrets and learn Spanish fast. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Ollie Richards, and this channel is all about helping you learn a new language through the power of story so that you can become fluent faster and live your best life. And this guy, Nate from California, made very good use of his teenage years to learn to speak Spanish like this.
Pues ya llevas mucho tiempo, qué cool. Pero tú eres estadounidense, ¿no?
Sí, de Los Ángeles.
Pues yo también, güey. Somos amigos ya.
Chocolate.
Qué cool. Chocolate. Pues ya sabes. Mucho gusto,
So, Nate, before we get into the details of how you learned such good Spanish, give us the quick overview of your journey.
Started in high school. That's where I learned the rules and the basics and everything. Throughout high school, practiced with my friends who are native Spanish speakers, mostly Mexican, which is why today I speak with more Mexican Spanish. And did that. Then I lived in Spain actually for a little bit, for about 3 months. I studied abroad there. And then now my form of practice is just listening to music, podcasts, reading books, watching TV. But that is the very bird's eye view of kind of my Spanish journey.
Okay, so he started young, he had local Spanish-speaking friends, he went abroad to Spain, now he lives his life in Spanish. Look, before we start, if you are thinking right now, well, it's okay for him, he had all these opportunities, stop right there, because you can learn a lot from this, from what Nate did. Even if you are older, you don't have local friends, you can't afford to study abroad, whatever, there's a lot to learn, so keep watching to find out what that is.
So yeah, it's funny because whenever people ask me, oh, how'd you learn Spanish? My go-to answer is just high school, because I was like, yeah, high school, it's the easiest thing for me to say. But because of my friends, I think my Spanish is where it's at today, because I would, every single day, especially during lunchtime, I'd go to my Spanish class, then I would go to lunch and I would speak with my friends, and I would force them to only speak to me in Spanish.
And in case you think this is all very easy, remember, these high school friends of his are bilingual, so they are going to want to talk to Nate in English like they talk to everybody else. And we all know that one of the most difficult things in speaking a foreign language is to stop people speaking English with you all the time, right? I mean, you can think for yourself, have you ever suffered this problem before? You know how difficult and even crippling this can be to have everyone speak to you in English all the time. So was it easy for him to get his best friend to speak in Spanish with him?
Him and I were talking about this the other day. A lot of times he'd be embarrassed, and it's funny now because sometimes it's embarrassing for a native speaker to speak with someone who's learning. But I don't know, I didn't let that deter me. I was like, please just only speak to me in Spanish. I'm going to learn this language. I'm more embarrassed than you.
He really persisted. He really forced his friends to speak with him in Spanish. And this is a kind of an attitude and an energy that you're going to see throughout this story with Nate. But you don't have to accost native speakers, and especially if you don't have native speaker friends. But you do eventually, if you want to learn to speak well, need to create reliable and frequent speaking opportunities. And the fact that Nate did this when he was so young is really vital to his journey. But of course, speaking alone isn't enough. Have a listen to this.
I'd be like, well, Luis, why is it this instead of this? He's like, I don't know, man, it just is. So then I'd take it back to my Spanish class and be like, Maestra Lance, why is this? And she'd be like, oh, well, because this. I'm like, oh, okay, Luis, this is why it is. And then that's kind of how it went, was like from class to friends, back to class, and then back and forth like that, trial and error.
I actually think that method doesn't matter all that much in language learning if you have the right attitude. Attitude trumps method any day. And so with Nate, sure, the friends help. But what's much more important is the curiosity, the insatiable curiosity that he has. And you can bring this to your own learning as well. It's cultivating a mindset of discovering, figuring out why certain things are the way that they are. But what's interesting for me is why a 14-year-old would push so hard. We saw this with Lucy and with Matt. It's kind of almost like teenage angst, a desire to be different that pushed them to get to very high levels in their language. But what was it for Nate? Because after all, Nate didn't enjoy his Spanish classes at first. So what would happen after he left class?
Then I leave the class, I'm like, well, I have friends who I know speak Spanish. Let's try this out. And then we were going up to Luis, and I'm like, all right, Luis, I just learned some things, and I just want to see, if this makes sense to you. And I was like, in a horrible accent, I'm like, buenos dias. And he's like, yeah, that's like good morning. And I'm like, wait, you understood that. And like it's like all of a sudden my brain was just like, oh.
And it sounds silly, but so many people just have their heads stuck in textbooks all the time. It's easy to forget that language learning, and well, language, it's a living, breathing thing. But the thing that Nate did really well, and it was almost certainly a deciding factor in his success with Spanish, was to start to engage with the Spanish language as an authentic part of the community where he lived.
Me living in Southern California, we have a large Hispanic population here. And so it's very easy to find people who speak Spanish here. So I would speak with random people and everything. And I realized that people acted much differently with me than they would have if I was speaking to them in English.
And so with this, the language stopped being an object of study and starts to make sense in your life. So yes, he had great opportunities, sure, but the interesting thing in terms of language learning for us to think about is in our own lives, what languages are used naturally in our local communities? Because this can really be the path to the most fulfilling language learning projects, as the language can really become part of your daily life. So if you don't always feel motivated in your learning, ask yourself, how can I make this real for myself? Now, people sometimes have mixed feelings about imposing themselves on others for language practice. So how did Nate deal with this?
I never went at them like super strong, like, hey, you know, like this is what we're gonna do, and like whatever. It was like, hey, I'm just trying to learn this language. Like, I'd appreciate it if you spoke to me, if I could practice with you.
Would you actually have that conversation?
I would. I actually do that to this day.
Okay, you ask permission.
Yeah, I'd be like, hey, like, you know, I'm trying to get better on Spanish. Is it cool if we speak to each other or whatever? And they're like, oh yeah, of course, you know.
Yeah. If you get nervous talking to people, it's something that happens to me. One thing you could do right now is to script out and memorize a sentence or an opener, a conversation starter that you can use each time to start speaking with people and make it a little bit less awkward, or at least less likely that they will switch to English. Now, Nate kept up this Spanish during high school, and he reached a pretty good level in Spanish after about 2 years. And 2 years, even at this age, is not that quick. 2 years is a long time. But remember, even if you do have a great environment around you for practicing, you can't be speaking all the time. Even the best learners who have these great opportunities learn most stuff by themselves when they're studying alone. And this is why it's so important in these stories and these breakdown videos to focus on the attitude of the individual, because the attitude is something that you can copy, replicate, and cultivate yourself.
Even just like taking a shower, like in my brain, I'm talking to myself in Spanish, and I'm like, how would I say that? Or like, how would I do this? And I would like text my buddy Luis, hey, how would I do this? Or like, what's the best way to do this? Like, to this day, like if I go on walks by myself, I talk to myself in my head in Spanish. I would like strictly listen to Mexican music in my car. And so that is really when my Spanish just was like, just when I was like always hearing it.
Talking to yourself in the shower, asking friends how to say things, creating an immersion environment in your car. This is what language learning is all about. It's this all-out determination, consistency, taking control. And remember, all of this stuff, Nate did this from home. It was only after that, when he was at university, where he already spoke Spanish, that he had a fantastic opportunity to go on a study abroad trip to Spain for 3 months. And while he was there, he met local people, he had a few Spanish language classes and a few classes on other topics that were in Spanish. A nice big rounded mix of different classes there. But what did people say about that opportunity to go to Spain?
Like, oh, well, you went to Spain, that's why you learned such good Spanish. Well, no, actually, the majority of what I learned was back home in the States.
Yeah. Funny how that happens.
Yeah.
And this is funny, you know, because it's true that everyone I've covered in this breakdown series so far has actually gone to study abroad for a few months at some point. And that's why I get comments like this. But this is lazy thinking. A few months abroad is a drop in the ocean in a language learning journey. If all you do is go and study abroad, you're really not going to get anywhere. So you really do miss the point if you think that these people have been successful with languages because, and solely because, they went to study abroad. They were successful because they worked their backsides off at home on their own, using nothing but good old-fashioned elbow grease. And this is good news for you because anyone can do this. It's at those higher levels that going abroad really can be a useful experience because you can already communicate, but that's when you can start to discover the limits of your ability. Now, Nate points to a trip that he took to Mexico once with a friend, and it was just 1 week, but it had quite an impact.
That trip made me realize, after having learned Spanish for 4 years, thinking I was the man. I'm the man. I speak great Spanish, you know, and I go to Mexico and they're like speaking to me and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna need you to run that by me one more time. It was funny because that was a very humbling experience. I was like, oh shoot, okay, I can get much better.
And when we are talking about reaching higher levels in a language, a trip like this is important because it gives you something to keep aiming for, you know, a bit of a reality check. You know, the idea that you still have more to learn, which could really make the difference between being kind of just content to speak pretty good Spanish and really pushing for those higher levels. And another thing you can push for is that like and subscribe button right down there, and that notification bell too, because that way I can send you future videos. What have you found most interesting about Nate's journey so far? Let me know in the comments below. In spite of all of this, compared to other people that I've showcased in these breakdown videos, Nate has had a pretty smooth journey, really, and I didn't find any big ups and downs, any big major life events, or deeper psychology at work. Nate worked hard. He stayed consistent, and he really rode the wave of learning Spanish.
You know, I never took it like this like colossal thing or like event where I'm like, I need to have the best Spanish in the world. I mean, I need to be better than everyone else, and like I want my Spanish to be perfect. And I think for me, that like casualness of just like, hey, I really like this. I love this. Like, I find it fun to figure this out. It's like a puzzle.
Cool. So what's next?
I still realize I'm like, you know what? I could still get much better. I mean, that's still how I feel. I mean, now it's at the point where I don't it's not like I practice my Spanish. It's not like, okay, today I'm going to get better at this. For me, my practice is listening to music and watching shows and speaking with people.
And it's funny with languages, and everyone is different, but certainly for me, the point isn't to reach perfection in a language, but rather just to improve your quality of life, because life is so much richer with other languages and cultures as a part of it. But not everyone who learns Spanish has a journey as smooth as Nate. In fact, in this video, you will meet Lucy from the UK, who had to employ all kinds of crazy tactics to learn Spanish, including seduction, some trickery, and even a bit of deception. So to find out what that is all about and for a different kind of Spanish experience, click this video right now.